Hey, so welcome to more lectures in Python. We're going to take a little sidetrack today to talk about just grading for the course. So if you're not worried about that, you can skip this lecture. But we kind of, because of the way the course is graded, we kind of need to have a good example of the way it will be graded. Fortunately, one of the students in the class volunteered to let me grade their assignment, like fake grade it, so that I can sort of point out all of the things that I'm sure most people will run into as their first few assignments are graded. When you see this, if you notice that you're not fitting into these requirements, you can go back to your submissions and resubmit them or make a new set of commits if you're on the GitHub that update them to fit these requirements. So with all that being said, let's start here. This is the student submission of the variables and types assignment. So the first thing I see here is that we are missing the headers. So the reason that the first assignment that I gave y'all required y'all to write this comment header was I kind of wanted you to put it on all of your assignments. It's a good way to make sure that it's clear sort of who's writing it, and it gives you a chance to do a sentence or two explaining what the goal of the script is. This is partly for me, but also partly so that when this course is over, you can go back and look at your scripts if you ever are writing some new code, and it'll make it easier for you to know what you were doing in this script. So I'm going to copy my little comment header over here and throw it in this file. I'm going to just take the name off. Doesn't really matter. This would be your name, obviously, the date here, the name of your file, and a description of it. Learning how to use variables. Okay, so from there, this is going to be where most people, I'm assuming maybe like half the class will have put a comment header into their code, maybe less. I think that'll be reasonably common. But where most people are going to start to run into issues right away is, if you remember the grading breakdown, it said that a majority of your credit actually comes from commenting. And if you look through this code here, there are 1, 2, 3 comments in this whole script. That might be fine for you to understand your own code, but the point here is that I'm essentially grading your code based on how you talk about it in your comments. That's largely because the tools we have now make it so you can kind of generate code really easily and not have any idea what it's doing. And since this is a class, I need to make sure that you really, really understand why you're doing all of the things in your code. And the only way to really get that is via comments. So if I was going to I'd immediately start taking off points here because of the fact that you have these little blocks of code here that you're not telling me what they're for. So for example, you've defined 3 variables here. For one, a nice way to make this easy for me to grade is to start by doing let's make a multi-hashtag comment that just says task 1, right? Because this is going to be part of this task list that you're given in the assignment, right? So first is to define 3 variables. So this is that that task, and defining variables for later problems. So the rate at which I want you to comment is essentially every one of these, you've skipped a line, sort of blocks of code, you should have a comment on them, even if it's kind of silly, right? Like, sure, I know that we all know that you're defining variables for your problems, but when we get to some of the later core problems, maybe your variable might be a pretty specific use, right? Like it's an iterator, or it's just a temporary variable for a loop to a check variable or something like that, right? You should, if your variable has a specific use case, you should tell me what it is, so that I know that you know why you defined it. This block of code here, you can say adding two variables. Cool. And storing result. And see, this is immediately sort of an example of why I need comments. So to me, these two lines are the exact same thing. And we're going to show that we can add, subtract, multiply, and divide for task 2, which means that this is actually part of task 2. It'll be a little bit easier to define the individual tasks with other assignments, because the tasks for this first assignment are really very simple. So but I think maybe this is, I'm not sure why these are here, and this is why I want comments, because if you had a comment here, maybe you could describe why you needed both of these lines. So obviously, without any comments, you'd lose a lot of points there, because I don't know what you're doing. Here we get to the first comment the student made. Printing a comment on a string, show where the code was, and showing an error that you can't divide by 0. When you're writing these, you won't lose credit for this, but it makes it a lot easier for me and for you if when you get to about the full page, you just press enter and make a new line, so that you don't have that line that extends off the edge of the page. That's not going to lose you any points or anything, but it just makes things a lot easier to read. So throwing an error about how you can't divide by 0, and they'll say they'll ask their math professor. This is true, right? It's in the sort of answer for this problem is that, yeah, dividing by 0 is an undefined operation in math. So when you try to do it in the in code, you can't do it there either, right? It's functionally, it's a limit that converges to infinity, and the code doesn't handle infinity. Coding doesn't handle infinities very well. So yeah, this is a reasonably good answer. There's not really this problem in the task list doesn't really have a clear right or wrong. It's mostly a problem for thought, and we'll have a number of these in the semester. I try to give out mostly problems that have clear right or wrong answers, but I'll sometimes throw in a question in there that doesn't have one. And they're, questions to make you think a lot of times don't have really clear right or wrong answers. So, write something up in a comment and it'll get you credit. And I like that this student did add another follow-up answer to that, I guess probably after they went and asked some more questions. You'll notice that I'm putting spaces after the hashtags for these comments. It makes it easier to read. It doesn't do anything other than that. I also would have preferred, because this is a task list, add, subtract, multiply, divide, and then talk about what happens when you divide by 0. They did them a little bit out of order. That's okay. But I would prefer if you kind of kept them in the order that I had asked for. So add, subtract. Add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Funny enough, it looks like because of maybe the order, things going out of order or something. Oh no, so there is a multiplying down here. I was gonna say it looked like maybe we were missing multiplication. Add, subtract, multiply. Yeah, it makes it a lot easier if you really follow the order that these questions were asked for me. And so now we're going to move on to this might be, so the as far as grading this is concerned, also add 2 variables. All of these little groups of code here is going to be subtract 2 variables and store the result, multiply, and you can maybe start to see what I'm saying here. Like you're going to be like really commenting in many ways an unreasonable amount is what I want, right? You can't comment too much on these. You can comment too little. Dividing 2 variables. And I'm going to move the comment explaining the dividing by 0 to after, so we're sort of we'll sort of be in the same order the question was asked. So maybe you'll, I caused some kind of error here. What did I cause? I'll deal with that later. So yeah, you're going to be commenting way too much, and that's what I want. Because if you, it's sometimes hard to tell how much is enough to really convey your point to somebody else, right? To convey your point to me. A lot of times we read our own code and we think it's clear, but it's really not clear to other people. So you want to go over the top on this so that you're sure that nothing's missed for me, and that's generally how you should do this, right? Commenting from an optimization and code standpoint costs you nothing. it's a matter of investing a little bit of your time to save you or somebody else headache in the future. So it's, I don't know, it's a very, very good habit to get into. So next part was to so this is again why it's nice to have these broken into task lists. It looks like we might have jumped to doing some the task 4, which is defining variables, integer and float, and printing the type before and after. But we have sort of jumped past task number 3, which is to define these variables hello and world. Let's see. How do we define this? So in order to keep this in the same order, I'm going to move this down after that. So you've defined new variables. So we're going to say defining variables, defining text variables for task 3. We're going to divide this up and make it clear that it is task 3. Task 3. Defining some variables for task 3. So task 3 only really asked for hello and world, and then you were supposed to figure out that you could define these other variables for the space and the exclamation point to get it to print exactly how I was asking. So it looks like the student figured this out correctly. And then they're printing some other combinations of these, and we missed a second part of this problem, which was to explain what happens if you use subtraction. Essentially what I wanted you to see was using addition on a string kind of makes sense, right? You can add text together by kind of mashing it together, called concatenating. But if you start talking about multiplication or division, it gets a little bit weird. Even subtraction can be a little bit odd with strings. Mostly when you're working with text, you only really do addition. So we missed the second half of this problem. You would have lost some points for that. This is combining text. Oop, we got caps lock. Text via addition. And I like that. So this comment, the student points out that yes, you can add spaces and things between variables with the addition sign, and that's kind of the point of this task 3. And then we get to task 4. And we start talking about task 4 being changing in one of the integer variables to a float, and print its type before and after. So this is one way to convert an output to a float, is by doing division, because Python is usually smart enough to figure out that division will make something into a floating point. But really what I wanted on here was to use the explicit conversion functions that Python has. So that would be so my float equals a, but turn it into a float with the little float parentheses. And this tells Python to take a and make it into a float. Instead of this division sign, what really happens with division in Python is it will take it essentially applies this float conversion, but it does it on its own. It hides it from you. So when you divide two integers and you get a float out, really it's doing this conversion for you explicitly, kind of saying my float a equals that, my float b is that, and then you divide them, and then it's my result equals my float a divided by my float b. This is specific to this problem, but I'm just showing you. Convert variables to floats. And then the second part of this task 4 was to change the variables to floats and print the types before and after. So that would be print type, right? This type function that we talked about of a, and then print type of my float a, and you'll see that one of them is a one of them will print integer and the next one will print float, because you've sort of explicitly converted it in the intermediate step. And we need a comment here that we're missing, explaining what happens if you do the same thing with one of the string variables. So what happens if you take this d, this variable that's hello, and apply the float operator? Your program will fail. So essentially this would be, you do this little task to accomplish the task 4, and then you'd add a comment here and say, if I try to convert a text variable to a float, the program fails with a type error because we don't have a standard way to convert text into a number. Easy. Okay. So there you go. This is what I would be looking for, right? A header comments on essentially every single block of code and trying to keep your code in the same order that the requests are in, so that I can figure out what parts of your code are actually applying to what questions for homework. If I was to grade this, and we can have a back and forth when you submit things. Your grades are not going to be actually formally applied until the end of the semester, because nothing has official due dates. So we can have a back and forth. But if you just submitted this and wanted me to leave it until the end of the semester, code-wise, we got most of the questions answered. There are some key parts that are missing. 4 questions, and 2 of them were essentially kind of half done because they were missing the comment portion. Code-wise, I would say 60 or 70, probably 70% on this assignment. And then comment-wise, we were missing almost all of the comments, other than the maybe 1 or 2 that were there. Comment-wise, this would have been a 30%. So given that I have a higher weight for comments than I do for the actual assignment, if you turned this in as it was and didn't correct anything out, you probably would get like a 40%, 50% on this assignment, and it would fail. Which, this is what I'm saying, where just having the code down, because most of this assignment was done with working code, but I really place a very strong weight on having these comments to be able to walk me through what you're doing in your code for reasons like this. I don't know what these lines were for, why we had two sets of additions. I'm not sure what the goal of the 2 sets of numerical and integer numerical float code here was. So like in general,